Good evening and welcome to Sunday, Seminar Sunday, where we focus on ways to enhance our Toastmasters experience. In light of the early in May time frame for this meeting, we know that there are many clubs that are going through club elections right now, and tonight's theme is on delegation. We'll be talking about delegation, building a team. So those newly elected or soon to be newly elected officers can then start to build their extended team and make sure that they're learning how to effectively delegate. By way of introduction, leaders cannot accomplish goals alone. Others may need to act on the leader's behalf. A leader relies on others to do some of the necessary work. There's only a limited amount of time that you can do, or limited amount of things that you can do. However hard you work, the number of people you have can help is limited. So your success is limited if you don't involve other people to do this. That's why we're focusing on leadership and we're focusing on delegation this week. My name is Sean Gold. I'm the District Director for District 21, and I'll be leading tonight's session on delegation. So the objectives for tonight are to learn what delegation is, know what you can and should delegate, understand the barriers to delegation, learn a process to effectively delegate, and hopefully to appreciate the benefits of associated with it, delegation. But first off, let's look at a definition of delegation. The official definition is the process of transferring responsibility for a specific activity or task from one person to another and empowering that individual to accomplish a specific goal. Well, that sounds pretty straightforward. Leaders achieve their goals not by working harder and longer, but they do it more effectively by delegating the work to others. Now, where leaders delegate, they empower them. When they do delegate, they empower themselves and they empower their team members. And when the number of people you can help that you have that can help is limited, your success is limited. So everyone benefits when you can delegate and when you can get other people to participate. Delegation is an important part of our Toastmasters clubs. Our president delegates responsibility to other club officers. Meeting roles such as Toastmaster and Evaluator are delegated to club members. So it's not something that's new. It's something that we do on an ongoing basis. What I'd like to look at first is what you can delegate. Now, first off, one of the most important things is routine tasks. And those include, for example, club meeting roles and assigning mentors, post-meeting newsletters, whatever other things that you have going on. So I'd like to get some of the feedback from the people on the call tonight. And if you guys want to unmute yourselves, please feel free to do so. And just what are the things that you do on a routine basis that you would delegate to other club officers or club members and during the regular course of a week or during the regular course of the Toastmaster year? So these are some of the routine tasks. There's also special events that tend to need to be delegated or can be delegated on a routine basis. Things like contests. These are an important thing that takes place throughout the year. So you have open houses that we'll be having at various club meetings, especially as we get the big push to get our membership numbers in, so we can achieve our membership goals associated with our Distinguished Club program. And in order to do that, you need to have open houses. Having an open house is something where you should have people participate in ways of preparing food, preparing any materials you want to have, inviting guests and bringing guests along. So that's something that you would delegate that responsibility or many of those responsibilities to the existing members as well as some of the club officers and anyone else that you might have that would be associated with helping to put on that event. And of course, contests. Now we only have one formal contest season throughout the year. And this is something that we struggled with a little bit this year because we didn't have the fall contest last year as a requirement because there was no place to go beyond the club level. And it's something that I'll be looking at specifically to see, is there something that we can do better to drive the right behavior, to get people to move to engage in putting on some local club contests, even if they only stay at the club level, but to get people experienced with putting on a club contest, running one, having people participate, getting people to contestants that will compete in it, and just for fun. And even though it doesn't go beyond the club level, at least you'll understand the process of putting on a contest and how that will work. So those are things where you should delegate as much as possible because you want people to learn how to do that task. And it's a great opportunity to do that. And then there are specific roles that you might also have. Now, whether that be within a contest, such as a chief judge, or if you're taking on a district level rather than just at a club level, there are things like assistants. So you can have a role being, and even within a club, you can have an assistant to the vice president of education. So that would be someone that could be doing something such as coordinating mentorship. Within a district, you can have area directors, assistant area directors, and assistant division directors that would help out. So those are specific tasks that you might have. I was a member, or not a member, but I went to a club once that had a role that was, that I can't remember the title of it, but it had to do with humor. It was someone who was responsible for making sure that the clubs were fun and laughing, and there's a lot of humor associated with it. And I think they also had during a meeting role called the chief laugh counter. So there are all kinds of tasks and roles that you might have that are specific either to a meeting or specific to a function or event. So there's a lot of things that you can have where you just don't want to be doing all the work yourself, whatever role you're currently in, and you just want to engage other people who are more appropriately suited to that. But we have challenges when we get into delegation. We have challenges where people are reluctant to delegate. And there's a lot of reasons why people are, we'll refer to as barriers to delegation. So let's take a look at that next. One of the first things is lack of confidence. And we're talking about leaders may feel uncomfortable about delegating because some leaders simply do not believe that the team members have the ability to do the necessary tasks. Now that's a common one where you think as whatever role you're in, that you are potentially the best person for it or the only one capable of doing it. Because you look at some of the others and say, well, I don't see them being capable of doing it because they haven't stepped up. They don't show the desire to do it. They don't put in the energy to do things in the club. So, I'm not confident that they will do that. And that's a little bit short-sighted if that's what you tend to believe. Because what we'll find is that if you approach people in the right way and ask them to take on a role, they often surprise you by actually stepping up to do a good job. But you have to ask them, and you have to and we'll get into how you can assign how to do the delegation, the steps to delegation shortly. But if you don't do that, if you don't set them up, if you don't ask them, and if you don't give them an opportunity, they may not, they can't show that they are capable of doing it. And we have many people in our clubs that are capable of doing roles beyond what they currently do, but we may be reluctant because, again, we don't feel that they have we're not confident in them. And I think that these people, in many cases, are capable of doing it and are willing to do it, given the right push in the right direction. The other thing is around control. Control is a big issue. Sometimes leaders are just afraid of losing authority and any kind of control associated with that. And I've seen that in club presidents who feel that it's their responsibility to do all of the major functions, and they don't feel that they can control the outcome if they are not doing it themselves. And we'll talk about that in some ideas around how you can make sure that you do get control, or that you still have some control but still are able to delegate effectively. Another idea or area around a barrier is around selfishness, and it's around sharing credit. It's typically where you say, well, it's my job to do it, and if I'm successful, I want to make sure that I get the pat on the back. I'm the one who did all the work, so I ought to be getting the credit for it. I don't want to share that credit. Now, we don't see that. I don't see that often, but I think that is a subconscious thing that also takes place. All of these can be running in the back of people's minds without being forefront, and the reason for not delegating. But these things can be working in the background and hold you back from being prepared to delegate that function or a function to someone else. Another one, and this one I see significantly in the business place, in the workplace, and this is insecurity about their own capabilities. So when a leader or a person in a leadership role or in a role isn't confident in their own ability, they may be reluctant to share that role or delegate some of the aspects of that role to someone else, for fear that that other person will recognize that their shortcomings and that they're not capable of necessarily doing it, whether those shortcomings are real or not. And this is an important thing that we as Toastmasters should be very cognizant of and be paying close attention to, because we know that Toastmasters is a great place to learn, and it should be a safe place to learn. And we don't assume, or we should not assume, that anyone taking on a role is completely 100% competent in doing that role. We assume that they are going to learn to be able to do that role in the early stages of taking on that role, but that the process is a learning process, and we learn as we go. So thinking that you have to be a completely competent role or functionary in that specific role that you're taking on at the very beginning is not quite true. It's not a valid. It should not be considered to be a valid concern, because we do want people to grow and to learn, and Toastmasters should be the safe place to do that. So we expect people and want people and encourage people to take on roles that are outside their comfort zone, and it will force them to grow and learn by going into that role and learning some new skills associated with it. And the last one that I have here on a barrier is around reluctance. And this reluctance is where a few leaders are just reluctant to ask others to take on additional responsibility. Just don't want to do it. And then they end up doing all the work themselves. In all cases, if you use any of these excuses, you end up doing all the work yourself. Have you seen any of these situations in place within your experience within Toastmasters, or even outside of Toastmasters?
Yes, I did. And it's a very hard or a fine line between pushing people to do something, expecting them to do, and they promise you to do something and then they don't do it. I remember years and years ago in another club when we were doing newsletter, person promised to do the newsletter and didn't, and I was really showing my disappointment, and they quit. So I never did that again. Maybe, I was not gentle enough. Now I explain, health, family, job comes first, and then it's Toastmasters. And it's better. It's better. People are more willing to do. And reluctance. Well, I think it's if you worry about something that it won't be done, well, then you just have to let it be and let people show up that they can do it.
I agree. It is about letting people know that your expectations are not. We shouldn't be setting our expectations so high that a person feels that they're not going to be able to do it. But we should also not set them so low that a person can get away with doing nothing in the role. We do need to make sure it's clear that what the minimum expectations are. Well, we'll get into the whole process of delegation in just a moment, but what I wanted to see is what are some of the barriers that you've seen, and this is open to everybody, some of the barriers you've seen expressed by people within your club or people in whatever organization you're involved in when there's a good opportunity to delegate, but that delegation has not taken place.
People say, I'm busy, I've got 2 jobs. So then you are afraid to ask them to do something.
So what is the reason for not asking them? Because they say that they've already said that they have 2 jobs, or they're too busy already?
Yeah, 2 jobs and a course, I'm going to course, and I say, gee, you were my hope. You really were my hope, and now I'm afraid to ask.
Okay. I mean, one of the things that I've learned in the process is that sometimes you do have to ask over and over, and for a different task and for different reasons, not just to ask the same person over and over the same thing over and over, and it becomes annoying. But asking that people, maybe even taking it to a second step, and when they say, no, I'm not able to, I'm busy, I'm too busy for that, it's positioning it appropriately, but also trying to make sure that you understand some people do need to be pushed, and understanding what they want. So this is back to the role we talked before about the role of the vice president of education, is to understand what is a person trying to achieve. And if they had some high expectations when they joined Toastmasters, but they don't want to be taking on any specific challenges outside their comfort zone, there's a conflict there. They're not actually going to potentially achieve their goals if they don't go outside their comfort zone and push people along. So it's having a good understanding as to what people want, but also just asking people. I think it's important to ask people, especially if you think that they would be good at it, and show them potentially why, a connection between what that role might do and their goals, or how they might be able to improve. Because, as I said earlier, there are people who may not see the connection. There are people who would gain greatly from that, taking on that role as a means to actually get some skills in a background that they wanted to achieve. And I think it's important to ask the question. Just let the person you're asking be the one who decides, as opposed to deciding on their behalf in advance that they aren't going to do it, that they shouldn't do it. But then by asking them, it gives them the chance. If you don't ask them, you are not giving them the opportunity to say no.
Thank you.
No problem. See, we have a quiet bunch, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. If anyone does want to chime in, please do so. All right, next up. So Toastmasters has a program or a listing of 5 steps in order to delegate. The first step is prioritize. And this is an important thing. Whenever you're taking on a new role, is to take a look at what's the workload involved. What are the things that have to get done? And just take a look at how much work has to get done associated with it. Figure out what it is you need to be doing, or needs to get done, and how much you can do, or how much you can do effectively. So that's the first step in delegation. The second step then gets into something a lot more complex, and that's matching the needs that you have to the availability and ability of others. So you want to match the requirements of each responsibility with who is available and what they can handle. And in order to do that, you need to consider a few things. The first one is knowledgeable. Make sure that the team member, anyone you're going to ask, has the knowledge needed to do the task. So if they have the knowledge, that's a great step. But as you said earlier, Micah, and as we all know, that if they're not motivated, they're not going to get that far. So a team member may be knowledgeable, but if he or she is not motivated, or does not believe in the leader's goals, or just not interested, it's unlikely that person will make the effort to accomplish the task at hand. And then that just becomes a problem. And the third is able. And if the team member has other responsibilities, again, could be working a full-time job, 2 full-time jobs, or varying vacation, other things, he or she may not have the time to devote to the assigned task, or may not be able to give it the attention it needs. So that's a typical one that I've been hearing, and not just from what Micah said a moment ago, but hearing it all the time from members. I'm so busy. I've got so many things going on. My life is filled. That seems to be the new mantra. And I'm not certain it's necessarily the case. I think that we all think that we're busy. And when I've done 2 things in my life that proved that even though I was busy, I had no idea how much available time I really had until I took on these 2 other tasks. One of them was back in 1996 when I was working full-time parent, co-parent, and had a social life. And I decided to start an MBA program, which required, they said nominally 22 hours a week. Well, that 22 hours turned into about 60 hours a week, in addition to a 40-hour work week, which, because I was a manager, had a lot of travel involved, that was typically 60 hours a week. And I had to figure out how to make that all work over a 4-year period or 3-year period. That was a challenge. And that one showed that when I completed that MBA program, at the end of it, I had so much time available to myself that I had it took a couple of years afterward in order to be able to refill that time or to squander away that available time over a period of time, because I just had so much available time that I didn't realize that was now going to be available to me. And the second job or second role was this past year, taking on the role of the program quality director and then the district director. That takes on a fair amount of time. And I'm a full-time parent and work full-time and have a lot of Toastmaster clubs I'm involved in. So that was an added task, an added role and responsibility that more than filled my available time. But as it turns out, I still have available time. And when this role ends in another month and a bit, a month and a half, I will have a lot more available time that I will end up filling with other things or squandering away. So we have a lot of time. People use the excuse that I'm so busy, that we have to be careful about that. And we should challenge them on that. Just because they say they're busy doesn't mean they really are. That doesn't mean that we have to pressure them into taking on a role. But it does mean that we do need to necessarily challenge that statement, that assessment that they're so busy that they can't do it. It comes down to what's important to the individual. And if you can make the task that you're asking them to do relevant to them as an individual, relevant to their goals, their ambitions, what they want to achieve in life, and show them that there's a connection to it, then it becomes more meaningful to them. And then they have the choice to determine whether they want to commit that time to doing the job. But you do have to check to make sure that they are willing to do that and are motivated enough that they will do it and do it successfully. But you do have to work with them to make sure that you make that connection between the value that the job will have for them. And if you can't find that connection where the value is, then you miss that key point. So they need to have those 3 key things. They need to be knowledgeable, they need to be motivated, and they need to be able. Now that's the second of the 5 steps. Let's jump to the third step. Now we're talking about how to assign responsibility. Now you need to clearly explain the tasks for which the team member is responsible and what the expected results are. So you fully describe the task and the expected results. You got to give all the information necessary to get the task started, or tell the team member where it can be obtained. And you have to state who else will be involved and describe their roles too. So that's making sure that we're describing that task and the expectations right up front. Second part of that is to identify the training needs. And that's, if the team member needs to have special training or help to accomplish a task, you got to provide it. And that may be just having mentoring, having someone to go to that they can help, that can help them, show them how to do it, and then have some backup, showing them where the training is available, and whatever is available to help get them up to speed to be able to do that. Again, Toastmasters is where we learn skills and learn to become competent in things that we don't currently know. So we expect people to need to be able to learn, but you can't throw them in there necessarily and say, just go do it. I mean, they might be able to learn that way, but typically what you need is to be able to describe to them what they need, give them some training or some guidance, some one-on-one on-the-job training, as it were, and then they'd be able to do it more effectively and be successful at it. And you need to identify the resources. Make sure that the team member knows what materials, information, and if there's a budget that's required, make sure that they know what's available. So that's getting them to the resources, and in all cases, showing them where the resources are And it could be people resources, phone numbers, contacts. It can be materials that are online or that you have existing documents of, past records that the club has kept. For example, a budget template if it's a treasurer. It could be the minutes template if they're a secretary. It can be the scheduling template if they're a VP Ed, and so on, things like that. So each of those roles should have some materials to help transfer the responsibility from one year to the next. Next is empowering and granting authority. Now this one's pretty important. You got to give the team member the authority to gather the resources and make the necessary decisions to achieve the desired results. But also you have to specify the amount of authority being delegated. This is an important thing. So if the team member must get your approval for expenditures over $1,000, be sure that they know that they need to get that. So when you're empowering someone to do something, you need to make sure that they understand what their bounds of authority are. Now, if you're having an assistant do something, you need to understand that the assistant may not get the credit of the role or get the credit of the specific role. And you need to make sure that they don't sign for things that they don't have signing authority for, that they don't take on, that they don't do things that they don't have, unless you're granting that. So there's ways of making sure that that's done. And you do this, whether this is being done at work or done within Toastmasters, it's the same thing, is to make sure that you grant authority within the bounds that you have, within the structure and authorization that you have to do that, so that they can take on those roles and do the things appropriately. But within work, whenever I or my manager or other managers go on vacation, one of the things that they say is that you usually have an out of office message that says that so-and-so has responsibility for, you can contact us when they have all authority up to but not including, or up to being able to handle personnel management, so such as, hiring and firing. They don't have that authority to do it on your behalf, but they have authority to do other things, maybe approving expenses, approving time cards or things like that, and conducting other business signatures and so on behalf of you while you're away. And that's that empowerment that is clear, and it's clearly defined, and you need to make sure it's clear so people don't do things outside their bounds of responsibility and potentially get themselves into trouble and make everybody look at it. So that's clearly one of the clearer things that you need to do if you're delegating authority to someone else, or delegating responsibility. And last of the 5 steps is to establish accountability. This, to me, is by far the most important aspect of delegation. Finding a person with the right skills and motivation and so on up front is very, very important. Don't get me wrong. But making sure that they're accountable and they understand that they're accountable for completing the tasks that they've agreed to complete, or completing the role, managing the role that they've agreed to take on. So you need to agree on what the performance standards are and timetables for completion. Prepare a timetable report, state the amount, frequency of progress reports issued, stuff like that. That's so you follow up on it. You're holding the person accountable. You're making sure that the person is doing the job that they were supposed to do. Now, this is very, very important, because you want to make sure it's getting done. And sometimes people will have been who have accepted a delegation of responsibility may not fully appreciate what that means or fully understand what their task is if the responsibility hasn't been clearly assigned, or there's some areas of question, and they may feel uncomfortable asking because they felt, well, I should know this, so I'll just do what I think is right. That's where that establishing that accountability and going back to them and checking on how they're doing and where they are in the process, and if they have any outstanding questions. And it's just a simple question and answer, just to make sure you're following up on things. It's not that you're checking up on them as such because you don't trust them. It's to make sure that the communication is clear. And if we as Toastmasters don't understand that process of making sure that we're communicating with anyone that we've delegated to make sure that the process is clear, so that there's no misunderstanding and things are being done the right way, as opposed to going off the rails because there was a misunderstanding, then shame on us, because we're supposed to be focused on communications. But this is something that typically goes wrong in a delegation. So you may say to somebody up front, you know, this isn't going to be an onerous task. I just want you to do this a couple of these things every twice a year. You know, let's say as an area director, I want you to be go to do a club visit a couple times a year and issue a report and so on like that. It shouldn't take very much time, but you need to get this done by these dates and so on. So you say that, and what they're hearing is that it shouldn't take a lot of time. You need to do this, but you know, they don't understand that things need to be done in a timely basis, need to be completed, and they may miss that, or they may just forget about it. They may, because you haven't followed up on them, they go, well, that can't be that important. You haven't followed up on it. Don't make any assumptions when you're delegating to someone else that they understand or that they remember everything you have said. That's not fair to them, and it's certainly not fair to you to assume that. It's a big mistake to assume that they have remembered everything explicitly and that they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And it's just common sense to follow up with people and make sure that they're able to do the job and that they're doing it the way that you hadn't expected it to be. And it's not that you're over micromanaging or over controlling, but you just want to make sure that you made your communication clear and there's no misunderstanding on it. And perhaps you haven't made your communication clear because it wasn't, again, it could have been for various reasons. It doesn't hurt to go back and ask and check, and then you can clarify. It's a lot easier to clarify partway through than at the end after a task has been passed due, and then say, why didn't you get this done? And the person says, that wasn't my understanding that I had to get it done by then. I thought I had more time, or some other thing. So following up. Follow-up is vital in the delegation process. As part of accountability, leaders must ensure that team members know the leader wants to hear about successes and problems. Leaders must offer feedback and help when necessary, and results will not meet expectations unless the leader pays close attention and monitors the progress. So that was just a little tidbit from within the Toastmasters manual on delegation. As a follow-up to that, leaders should recognize team members for their achievements when they provide the results the leader wants. Recognition encourages the members to do more. It also encourages other team members to achieve, and it makes everybody happy when you have that recognition. Everyone feels good about their role and what their responsibilities are because they recognize that they've done a lot of things, that they've done things right, and that recognition is a positive thing. So what are the benefits associated with delegation? And there are really good benefits. So first of all, you get a more involved and empowered workforce, and this is probably one of the best things to be done. Team members are more likely to be committed to a goal when they're involved and allowed to contribute to the success. So that's one of the key things that you need to understand. It can increase productivity and quality, both for the person who's delegating it, because they're now able to do more things because they were potentially being overwhelmed with tasks that could be easily delegated, and they're able to focus on getting the quality out there, not only of the work that they're doing, but the work that they've empowered or they've delegated others to do. There's reduced costs associated with it because you don't have to incorporate other resources to do that. You don't have to outside resources. And let's see, there's a couple more here. You get more innovation because you have more people thinking about things, and you have a greater commitment from the team. So once people are actively involved in delegated projects and activities, including problem solving, they develop a sense of ownership. Delegation benefits the leader, and by delegating tasks to team members, leaders can use the time to accomplish more complicated, difficult, or important tasks or goals. This can lead to a more creative, hopefully, and successful organization as a whole. But by delegating, there are certain things that you get from it. You get people, one of the things that we see a lot right now, especially when we have assistants, either you have an assistant to a vice president of education, which is an important thing to have, in my opinion, because vice president of education role is a tough role, and it's got a lot of things that they're responsible for. So I highly encourage, whenever I'm talking to to people who are running for Vice President of Education, who I'm encouraging to run as Vice President of Education, one of the things that I actively let them know is that they should plan to have at least one, if not two, or even more assistants. You know, you can divide up the task by having someone responsible for mentoring. You can have somebody who's responsible for scheduling. You can have somebody responsible for doing a weekly newsletter, depending on whose responsibility those are. These are things that you can empower or delegate to others to do, and it provides a lot of value by bringing more people in. Because the upside benefit is at the end of the year, you now have people who are involved in that process, and they are more likely to want to run for office, let's say as a Vice President of Education, because now they've seen what's involved, they've taken on a piece of it, and they're willing to take it on because they know that they can also delegate some of those responsibilities. The same thing with an area director or division director. Having an assistant area director or assistant division director is a great way to bring on new people to learn the job, have them help out. Maybe they're organizing a contest, an area contest or a division contest. Maybe they're involved in doing ACT, the training programs for the club officers. Maybe they're involved in doing some district-wide events or area-wide events, such as having running or coordinating the area council meetings or a division council. So you can have all kinds of tasks that you assign to these people, and they don't get any direct credit from Toastmasters International for that, but they get an opportunity to learn and get a taste of what's involved. And one of the people that was going to be joining me today, who unfortunately couldn't make it, was Mike Jean, who is the Division B director, and he has a team of, Division A director. He has a team of people, of assistants that are helping him, and those people are taking on a lot of tasks. And so there's a lot of things that you can do as when you're in a role, when you have assistants, and they can learn from it, so they benefit from it. You benefit from it when you are able to delegate some of those tasks, and the organization benefits because they have more people who know more things and are able to share that workload. So it's a really good, valuable skill to be able to do that, and it's a very good opportunity to do that. Now, we now have, they said, we're at early May. This is the first meeting in May is when clubs are supposed to be having their club elections, or as early as May as they can. And you want people to take on these roles. You want people to become club officers. You want to have, if at all possible, have a contest and have people who are competing in it. You have people running and wanting more than one person who potentially want that role. I think that's great. We just had a nomination meeting last week at one of the clubs I belong to, and we had at least two of the roles are going to be contested, which is great. We had people who are very interested in running for some of those roles. And that's a really good thing, because then you get an opportunity, because then you know that you have people who really want it, as opposed to being felt that they were obligated to take it on because no one else wanted it, no one else stood up. Knowing that you have other resources who can help you out, that you don't have to do this all by yourself, makes it a lot more easy to take on, makes it much more interesting and more valuable. And knowing you have the support of the club and all of the people there to help you do that is very important. So I encourage you all to learn, practice, preach the whole aspect of delegation, because it is something that is very important. Get people involved, put on programs, put on community events, put on open houses, and get people to participate and take on some things. And even if they say they're busy, you say, look, can you do this one task? Can you do this one thing? Can you help out here? And as they learn, what they start to understand that some of these things are not hugely onerous, and that they can have fun doing it and they can learn from it, it's a great way to get people to step up and to learn and to take on some of those roles and responsibilities. This is a quote from General George Patton, who was a United States Army officer, and I was going to say Army in the Second World War. I was wondering if he was in Africa, but I think he was in Europe. Never tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do, and they'll surprise you with their ingenuity. It's a pretty powerful statement. Leaders are evaluated not only on their individual performance, but also on how well their teams perform. A leader who takes the time to develop delegation skills is more likely to have a successful team. This is an important understanding. Now, I'm opening it up to questions. I'm going to show you some resources, and I'll open up to some questions just to know that Toastmasters International has a fair amount of information about delegation. So there's a training session or training program guide that you can download, and these are all available to the public. So these are all at toastmasters.org. If you go to the toastmasters.org resources, there's a document called Delegate to Empower. There's a page that says Delegate to Empower, and it has the links you can download on delegation. Also on the toastmasters.org site, and also under resources, there's Leading the Club to Success, and there's information in there on how to delegate effectively. In the July 2018 Toastmasters magazine, there was an article on delegation. You can download it by going to toastmasters.org magazine section and look at magazine issues for July 2018 on delegation. And also there was another article that was in a magazine, and it was on how to beat club officer burnout, and it talks about the whole aspect of club officers who are doing roles over and over again, or just rotating through the small number, and they get burned out on doing all these things, and how they can be more effective through delegation. Just do a Google search on delegation, or just go into the toastmasters.org website and search on delegation, and you'll get a number of these tips on what you can do and sources of information on how to do it more effectively. So coming up, this was a session on delegation. Next week will be, the Seminar Sunday will be on summer meetings and ideas for summer meetings, what you can do in the summertime. And I don't want to spoil it by throwing out too many ideas at this point in time. That will be led by Michael Bowen, who will be leading that, who's back tonight from his sojourn in the eastern part of Canada, United States. Following that, we'll be having a session on May 19th on leading by example, and you can see the rest of these scheduled to the end of June. And with that, I sign off and say thank you for attending, and have yourselves a great week. I appreciate you being here.